Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Today is Sunday. That means we're going to go ahead and do some technical analysis on the futures, as well as a few stocks that I'm watching into next week. Now, before we get into this video, I quickly want to say next week is a very important week. There is a ton of huge companies reporting earnings. When that happens, when you're around these very important earnings weeks, technicals can be sometimes not that useful. Technical analysis can only go so far. If a company has some really bad earnings and you have a really nice support line that you're watching from the downside, it can easily break through that support on bad news for earnings. It goes the other way. If you're looking at a resistance level on a certain tech stock or any kind of stock and it reports some really good earnings, some really big numbers, beating expectations, that resistance line can be broken right through. So make sure to keep that in mind coming into this week. And that's why in today's video, we're going to focus on 5 stocks that are not reporting earnings that could potentially get a sympathy play, meaning if a certain company like Facebook reports earnings, maybe a stock like Snapchat will go up with it because of its social media industry that it's in. So we're going to look at sympathy plays, and we're also going to look at a few stocks that have earnings later in May that we don't necessarily need to worry about right now. So hopefully you guys enjoy this one. Hopefully you get some insight coming into next week. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, guys, so as always, let's go ahead and start here on the NASDAQ. This is the daily chart. The first thing I want to say is that we are really coming into a make or break it week. Doing technical analysis here on the NASDAQ will not really mean so much if we have some really bad earnings next week. These support lines are not going to hold up. And inversely, if we have, some resistance lines drawn out here on the NASDAQ and we have some really killer tech earnings, we're going to break through that and we're going to go to all-time highs. So doing technicals, not so much, I don't believe in them so much this week because of what we have coming. If it was another normal week, we didn't have any big earnings or anything like that, then I would definitely look at some of these technical analysis levels, sort of like this 13,700 as support that we've been finding over the last 4 days. And then these all-time highs around 14,059. So we sort of have this channel. Where we go either to the upside or the downside is going to be determined next week. That's why I've been very light with my positions. I'm sort of waiting for that to come out, waiting to see what happens, and then we can play that continuation. We can go down to, say, the 10-day, 30-minute, and we can sort of look at some of these levels closer up. Basically what we just saw on the last chart. So you can see we have this 13,700 that we've held over the last few days, and then we have this high at 14,059. Those are really the short-term levels that I've been watching. We can go to the 4-hour and look at this again. You can see very similar. We have this channel that we're sort of trading in right now, and we have this previous high right around 13,900 back from beginning of February. So very interesting place we are here on the NASDAQ. Not really much that we can do technical analysis-wise. Let's just go ahead and see what happens next week. Let's go into the Dow, into the S&P, and see if we can see anything. But ultimately, those indices are going to be controlled by next week as well. So here's the S&P 500. You guys saw on Friday we broke all-time highs after having a really scary day on Thursday because of some of that capital gains tax information that came out. We fell on Thursday, spiked right back to all-time highs Friday. A crazy market that we saw over those last 2 days. But right now, we do have those moving averages still increasing here for us. 20-day is right around 4,100 now. So that will be the first place that I'd like to see if we get any type of fall. Do we find support at that 20-day? And then do we find support at the 50-day, which is right around this previous high. So that's pretty interesting to see. You can see we have this previous high here around 39.60. If we fall to that 50-day moving average, I'd like for us to make those previous highs and turn them into support. So if we get something like this, I'd want to see us turn that into support and maybe continue higher. But of course, like I've already said multiple times in this video, next week is going to decide where we go on all of these indexes. Let's go ahead and jump into the Dow really quickly here. And here's the Dow. So Dow, very similar to the S&P, continuously on this very strong uptrend, holding the 20-day every single time. And the nice thing that we've seen over the last few days is with this consolidation up here near the high, it is let this 20-day moving average continue to increase while the index stayed sideways. So the 20-day has really continued to increase and is now not too far below as support for us here on the Dow. We're in this consolidation zone, and once we get earnings coming out next week, we are most likely going to break in either direction. We're either going to see this move or we're going to see this move. The smart move here is to wait and see what happens. Do not try to anticipate this by taking some big call options or put options on some stocks that you think will move with the Dow, like say Home Depot, like Lowe's, like UNH, some of those big ones, the bank stocks as well. Wait to see what happens, wait to see where these indexes go, and play that continuation once all of this news is released, and we can go ahead and digest these moves. So that's it for the indexes. Next week is huge. Let's go ahead and look at these 5 stocks that I'm watching that are not so correlated to this week's earnings, could have some sympathy plays that we could take advantage of, and some that have earnings later in May that we can continue to use technical analysis and find some plays off of. So guys, number 1 here is Snapchat. Now Snapchat reported earnings last week and had some really great earnings. Positive free cash flow for the first quarter, I believe, in the company's history. Some really good news for the company. I have a call option currently on Snapchat. I have some $65 calls for June expiration, the monthly contracts, because I do believe we see this stock move past this 65 level resistance. 1, because of the earnings that we just had, which are very strong. And 2, because Facebook reports earnings next week. We have some other social media stocks reporting, like Twitter as well. And I'm anticipating some good earnings for those companies. If they have good earnings, then we should see some more movement to the upside on Snapchat as well. The whole social media area should get some boost. The NASDAQ should get some movement. And I think that ultimately helps Snapchat as well, helps it find some support through this 65 level resistance. One thing that I really liked, and one of the main reasons why I continue to be bullish here on Snapchat, is if we go into the hourly chart. So we're going to go into the hourly chart, and I'm going to show you something. So what we saw on earnings, we had a big move higher, a hold into the morning. So about, I think this was around, let's see, just about a 5-6% increase on earnings. So we moved up, gapped up on earnings, and then in the morning, we moved lower. So I'm actually going to break this down to the 30-minute, and we'll see this a little bit better. So here is the morning after earnings. We moved down, but we moved down to a very important level. We closed the gap on earnings. So we have this pretty strong support area over the last week. You guys can see this. It's been able to hold around this 57 level multiple times. Every time it touched that level, it is bounced. Now look what happened. So we had a gap up on earnings, and the next day we moved back down to that 57 and found some really strong support. The last 3 candles, the last about an hour and a half of the market on Friday was virtually straight up here on Snapchat. Very strong support here at 57.50, and I really like that, and I'm currently holding some calls. I do plan to hold these into, over the next few weeks. I have about 2 months until the end of expiration, so I like the position that I'm in. Ultimately, my goal is to see if it can move past the 65 level resistance that we have been stuck under. We've been sort of trading in this channel for the last few weeks. So right here, I want to see that break. Another thing that we're seeing here is a little bit of an inverse head and shoulders here on the daily. So if I clean this up for you, you guys will see that we have this inverse head and shoulders right here on the daily. So we have the head, inverse head there, a shoulder here, and another shoulder that just formed. So if we can have this inverse head and shoulders and then a bullish movement off of it, something like this through that 65, which is right around here, that is what I want to see. Inverse head and shoulders is a bullish formation. Hopefully we can see the end of this pattern work out with tech earnings next week, maybe with some positive news from Facebook, some bullishness on the NASDAQ. Let's see if we can get Snapchat through 65. So that is the number 1, and that is actually one that I have a position on. All right, number 2 is ROKU, another stock that's actually forming an inverse head and shoulders as well. So you have the shoulder here on the daily, you have the head, the inverse head right here, if this will work, and then we have the the last shoulder right here. So we have this inverse head and shoulders forming on the daily, and I like that we're holding this 20-day moving average right now. We do have the 100 and the 50-day above as resistance, so we do have to watch that. If we get some bullish momentum in next week with the tech earnings, ROKU would be one that I would definitely watch. Now, it doesn't report earnings, so we don't have to worry about that. They report earnings on the 6th of May, so it'll be in the beginning of May and not next week. But if we get some bullish momentum on tech, you bet that ROKU will find some sympathy and it will move higher with the tech market. I would look to see if we can find support at the 20-day here. If we can break this 50 and 100-day, then I think we get a nice move up to this 390 level. We have previous resistance here, and the reason we have resistance here is because we had a gap up that is forming some resistance right back here in the beginning of January. So we bounced off this level multiple times. This time we broke through it. We turned it into resistance, and now what you want to see is you want to see a break of that 390. You want to see a retest of that 390, and then turn it into support and move higher. That is what we want to see on Roku. That will form that little cup there. Ultimately, this looks like it could form a little bit of a cup and handle formation. You have this cup forming right now. Maybe it creates some type of handle and continues higher. That is a very long-term trend because we're looking at the daily here. But ultimately, I want to see, can Roku find support using this head and shoulders, inverse head and shoulders, 20-day moving average right here? Can the tech market move us higher into this 390 resistance next week? Let's watch Roku, one that should definitely move. It's been beat up quite a bit over the last few months from its highs to its lows here, about 40%. So a little bit of a discount, in my opinion, here on Roku. And with earnings coming up, maybe we get a nice move into earnings, and then we'll see what happens when they report. Number 2, Roku. Let's go ahead and get into number 3. Okay, guys, number 3 is Airbnb. Now, Airbnb, a little bit more of a volatile stock. And one thing to note is after earnings comes out, which is in the later in May 25th, they are having the lockup period end for their shares. This was a recent IPO. Insiders are currently under lockup period, meaning they can't sell their shares. Once that lockup period ends, you bet that some of those guys are going to be taking profits, and the stock is most likely going to get a little bit of a short-term, tank in the price. I don't want to say tank. That's a little bit of an aggressive word, but maybe we see some downside after the share lockup ends. So what I like here is we have this bull flag here on the daily. So we have a triple bottom here, multiple times finding support around 170. We did it again over the last 4 days, and we are starting to see a bullish move off of that once again. Every single time we came back to this 170, we have gotten a 15% move here. On this attempt, we had about a 24% move, and then back here when we found support, this was when it went to all-time highs, about a 30% move. So maybe we can see, maybe up to the top of this bull flag, about a 12 to 13% move off of this 170 support. If history repeats itself, this would work out. You can clearly see every single time it hit 170, it is bounced in some degree. 20-day moving average could find some resistance here. That would be one to watch. And then you have the 50-day moving average above. On the last 2 attempts, you can see it found resistance at the 50-day right here. And then on these 2 attempts, we sort of did break through that 20-day. So maybe we can break that 20-day, but we do need to watch this 50-day around 188. Then after that, you want to see if we can break the downtrend of this bull flag. Ultimately, we want to see it break all the way through and find some really nice movement here up to all-time highs if you are a bull on Airbnb. But right now, 170 support, I love that. What I'm looking at is to see if we can break this 20-day and if we can break the 50-day moving average. Let's see what happens next week. Just calling this out so that you guys are alerted that this is at a very strong support area and could potentially find some momentum next week. No earnings to worry about. If tech heats up, maybe we can get some movement here on Airbnb. Let's go ahead and get into number 4. All right, so number 4 is a pretty highly speculative play, and it is Netflix. We know Netflix is a little bit uneasy right now because of the big drop that we saw on earnings. A massive gap down here on the daily chart. This was about, I think, 8, 9, 10, around there percentage points. So pretty big drop here on Netflix. We have the moving averages higher, which will ultimately, be resistance when we get back to that level. One thing that I'm seeing right now is we are still on this uptrend. It's a pretty lazy uptrend. It's sort of just slightly moving higher, but we do have support here. Every single time we've hit it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times we have found support right here on this uptrend. So it's very clear to see that, and if history repeats itself, maybe we get support here again, and maybe we can sort of fill this gap. So if we can fill this gap, that's big upside. That's almost 8 to 9% upside here on Netflix. Very possible. The one thing that Netflix is going to need is some movement on the market. If tech has good earnings, if NASDAQ breaks all-time highs, if we get all of its counterparts really performing well, maybe we can see a sympathy play here on Netflix. Disney earnings, Roku earnings will both be very important for Netflix as well to see how those 2 streaming companies reported. Maybe it can move Netflix as well. Right now, I'm not saying whether Netflix is a buy, if it's not a buy, but it definitely keep an eye here on Netflix. This could be a very big opportunity on this gap down. Maybe we can go ahead and fill it. On its last earning report, like right here, we had a gap down on Netflix, right? This was a gap down on earnings. We did attempt to fill that gap. We didn't fully hit it. We ended up filling it almost, what is that? Almost 2 months later. So maybe this gap fill does take some time, and that's why taking short expiration contracts, probably not the best idea because you need to give this time. But let's see. This gap down is here, and in the past, every single time there's been a gap on the daily chart, one is a big one here, gap up, we filled that gap up. Gap down, we ultimately filled that gap down. We have a gap down right now, and we are in the early stages of this potential recovery. When will Netflix move back up here and fill this gap? I'm not sure, but definitely keep an eye on it. Shares, if you want to buy shares of Netflix, that could potentially be a great opportunity right here on this gap down. Buying leaps, maybe a year out, also a potential opportunity. But buying short-term calls here, very risky, very speculative. Maybe we get some type of movement, but be very careful. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is make sure to watch Netflix over the next few months. Wait to see when it starts to find momentum and if it can fill this gap, which ultimately I know it definitely will. We just don't know when. Let's go ahead and get into number 5. All right, so number 5 is one that I continuously watch on a daily basis, and that is Square. I love where Square is right now. Square had a break of this 242, 243 resistance and is now retesting that level. So this is a perfect break and then a retest of that level, and you want to see it find support and move higher, right? That is a very bullish formation, a break and retest of support, turning resistance into support and then moving higher. Right now, we are sitting at that break and retest level. We're sitting at that support level of 243. We also have the 50 and 20-day moving average right there acting as support. I think this 250 or this 243 level is very strong, and it has been in the past as resistance, and I want to see it turn into support. One thing that I like for Square coming up, earnings are in the beginning of May, so May 6th. Tech next week, big tech earnings. If tech has good earnings, which I'm not saying it does, I don't know what's going to happen, but if it does have good earnings, definitely watch Square here for a move back towards these highs. Ultimately, a move back to around 277 to 280. If we have good tech earnings, if the NASDAQ breaks all-time highs, and we have some big moves on some big tech companies, Square is definitely going to move with them. It is part of that NASDAQ. It's part of some of those big high-flying tech stocks, those growth stocks, and Square will definitely move with those names. If we get those moves, watch this support here at 243, 20-day, 50-day acting as support as well. I want to see a move off of this level, a move back up towards these highs. Now with this play, confirmation is key. Don't just get into it Monday thinking that, tech's going to be some really good earnings and I'm going to catch this sympathy play on Square. Square could easily break this 243 and move back to the 100-day at 233, and that would crush any short-term option contracts. If tech has bad earnings, Square is going to move down with it as well, maybe find some support at this 100-day moving average. Wait for confirmation, wait for some of these earnings to come out, have some positivity come out next week, start to see a move here on Square, and try to catch some momentum higher. That's number 5. That is definitely one that I'll be watching next week on Square. All right, guys, so moral of the story is next week is massive, and I'm not going to downplay it because it truly is very important. It will decide where the NASDAQ goes. It will decide where the market goes in the short term. Do we break through all-time highs on the NASDAQ, or do we pull back to some support levels? That is what it's going to do, and you bet that if the NASDAQ falls, you're going to have some tech stocks fall as well. So be patient next week, wait for confirmation, wait for some of these news reports to come out, some of these earnings calls to come out, and then start to find some plays. We went over 5 stocks that I'm watching next week, some of them not really correlated with what will happen. So Airbnb not reporting earnings, Square not reporting earnings, Snapchat, but some of them will have sympathy plays. So Snapchat will most likely move with Facebook, and that's sort of what you guys want to be looking at. Find stocks that are in similar industries that are reporting next week and see if you can get some movement off of them. For example, when Apple reports earnings, Microsoft moves, Amazon moves, Tesla moves. It's just sort of the way that things go, and it's sort of the feeling around some of these stocks after they report earnings. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Monday is going to be Tesla's earnings after hours. That will be crazy to watch. I'm very excited to see what happens. I have no plans of having positions for that earnings report. I just have my shares and my long-term portfolio ready to go if it goes up. If it goes down, we average in and buy some more shares. Keep it cool, keep it calm and collected, see what happens next week. I hope you guys play it safe and are able to earn some money. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend and have a profitable week next week, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.